It's a governance challenge. And you see these all over the world, principally, and I think, in three categories. The one where I think the Club of Madrid can do the most good is like what I do in Haiti today. I love working in Haiti because I believe in the Haitians. Hillary and I took a delayed honeymoon trip there in 1975, and they've never had a government worthy of their people, not in more than 200 years. They are, I believe, the only country ever to establish a democratic government through a slave revolt in the early 1800s. And in a way, the Haitians made me president, because the American Constitution says you have to be born in the United States to become president. The Haitians caused Napoleon so much trouble that he sold half of America to the United States. That's what the Louisiana Purchase is about. So I owe the Haitians a lot. They made me president. I was born in the Louisiana Purchase territory, and I've been trying to pay it back for 35 years now. But they threw off the chains of their enslavers, but then were subject to abuse and neglect, and then, like so many children are that are abused and neglected, they practice self-abuse and self-neglect. And they never developed the systems without which prosperity can be created. If you don't have them, you can't do it. So a lot of the work that we're trying to do now in Haiti is helping them build systems. They have a president, a prime minister, a government committed to making decisions. Every time I see the president, he wants to know how many people we moved out of the camps, how many children we put in school, and how many people we put to work. That's a whole different approach than I used to have to spend 30 minutes listening to the latest litany of complaints about what the legislature had done to the president, or the president had done to the parliament, or something else. Now they just want to do things, but they don't have the systems. They need a governance system, a finance system. And I saw Gregory Mevs here, who's from one of the guys that has worked the hardest to help put Haiti back together. A competitive infrastructure system. I could go on. Never more than half the kids have gone to school. A lot of them, no matter how poor, are supposed to pay tuition. They had fabulous healthcare NGOs, and they had one very good public hospital, but never had a real healthcare system. And the reason there's a cholera epidemic is not just because a UN peacekeeper from South Asia carrying the virus or the infection allowed it to find its way into the water supply of Haiti and then spread it. That would have never happened if they'd had a sanitation system. They need systems. And it begins with governance and capacity. Haiti, second only to India, has had the largest number of NGOs per capita on and off for decades. But they've never been coordinated before, never been part of a common strategy before. And because there's been incapacity and on occasion corruption in the government, the temptation is to say, well, we'll just spend the money through the NGOs, or let the donor governments come down and do what they're supposed to do. But unless we build the capacity of the Haitians to govern themselves, their democracy will not flourish. And it's the sort of thing the Club of Madrid can make a real difference on. And I find this all over the world. And in the film you just saw, long toward the end, I'm in Africa, and you see that it's obviously in a rural village. We were in a place in Tanzania for one of those pictures where we have a climate change project where we're basically doing reforestation and then hoping to earn them carbon credits with which they can redevelop their economy. It took me an hour and a half to go 18 kilometers on a road. Another one of those pictures in Malawi where the average farm is an acre and a half, and the farmers we're helping chose a woman who had been widowed to be the spokesperson. She farms a quarter of an acre, and before we went down there, she was living on $80 a year and supporting her only child, one child, the two of them living on $80 a year. Then she made $400 a year because we improved her seed, her fertilizer, and we cut out the middle person in taking the farm to the food to the market, so she got to keep her whole income instead of just half of it. I say that because all these, in one way or the other, amount to an absence of governance, of the rule of law, of systems. Every time there is a famine in the Horn of Africa, Somalia is a separate case because of the political turmoil. But a famine that embraces eastern Ethiopia and Djibouti and Somalia and northern Kenya, I get physically sick because we do a lot of work in Ethiopia. We help them to build hundreds of clinics, all part of the governance system. They have a minister of health, and wherever you're from in the world, if he were your minister of health, you would be proud. But they were running a country of 80 million people with great urban health systems where 60% of the population, 58 million people, lived in 60,000 villages of 1,000 people or less, and they only had for the entire country 700 clinics. So anyway, we helped them build a few thousand more. That's the good news. The bad news is the last time I was there reviewing it, I happened to be there right before the crops were harvested. And I flew low in a helicopter over the vast Ethiopian fields, and I saw these massive crops, and I knew that they could have alleviated the call for international aid for food that came out a couple of months later, but they had no storage, and they had no transportation capacity. They did not have the systems that most of the rest of us take for granted. So the importance of the Club of Madrid is you can take advantage of being an NGO. We don't have to worry about bad stories anymore. But you can know that we have to build government and governing capacity everywhere. And I will judge whether all these years that I've spent working in Haiti amounted to anything when I leave, in part by whether the government can do what government has to do, and in part by whether we build them a first really very, big, thick, vibrant private sector. They're already good on the NGOs. Rich countries like America, and now the EU with the euro crisis, Japan before the earthquake and the tsunami with its long-standing aftermath of the financial collapse in the early 90s. We all have systems. We built them on the way to prosperity. Our challenge is to reform them. And the wealthier and older you get, the more your public and private systems harden so that people become more interested in present benefits than in creating the future, more interested in holding on to the present positions than advancing the purposes for which your institutions were built. That's as old as time. You go back and read everything we now know about the Sumerians 8,000 years ago and bring it to the present. And there's no cause for despair in the modern world, except we got the same job to do because being human, we keep making the same mistake over and over again through the millennia, only with a new set of facts. Then you have the rising countries, China, Brazil, India, and Russia. The BRIC countries last year had a combined GDP bigger than the US for the first time. And they got all kinds of problems managing growth and not leaving the poor behind. India, for example, is a fabulous entrepreneurial country with the biggest middle class in the world, and yet still the largest number of really poor people in the world because they haven't been able to connect the prosperity centers to the rest of the country to bring everybody along. Because they're not as good at aggregating capital and investing it effectively to build one united economic network as, let's say, the Chinese are. But China couldn't figure out how to bring a lot of jobs and higher incomes in the rural areas, so everyone rushes to the city. Now you have more than 25 million people in the greater Beijing area, as a result of which they're facing not in the headlines, but profound environmental challenges. The Yellow River in many places is dry for significant parts of the year. And the favored solution could make it worse because it is to take the Yangtze, where it runs higher in altitude than the Yellow, and build 2 gravity-driven canals to put water into the Yellow River, which many Chinese engineers believe could lead to both of them drying up. That would be a calamity for the world.